The lights in Dubai's financial district still glow the same way they always have. Glass towers reflecting gold at sunset, chauffeurs opening doors, quiet conversations behind tinted windows. From the outside, nothing feels different. But inside those buildings, something has shifted, and it didn't happen loudly. It happened in silence. Over the past few years, entire floors have emptied out, departments relocated, teams quietly reassigned. And in some cases, institutions that once defined Dubai's rise as a global financial hub have begun moving their operations elsewhere, not shutting down overnight, not collapsing, just leaving. And the unsettling part is this: most people didn't even notice it happening. Because while headlines were busy celebrating new projects and record-breaking announcements, the foundation underneath was being slowly rearranged. What does it mean when banks don't fail, but simply choose to go somewhere else? And, more importantly, what do they see coming that others don't? For years, Dubai sold a very specific promise to the financial world: zero income tax, strategic location between East and West, a regulatory environment designed to feel familiar to Western institutions. It was positioned as the perfect neutral ground, a place where capital could move freely, where global banks could operate without friction. And they came, one after another, setting up regional headquarters, expanding teams, building influence across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. It wasn't just about profits, it was about positioning. Being in Dubai meant being at the center of growth. The belief was simple and powerful: if global wealth was expanding, Dubai would be one of the main doors through which it flowed. And for a long time, that belief held. The skyline grew, the financial free zones expanded. Deals were signed in private rooms overlooking the Gulf. But every system built on attraction must eventually face a test, not when things are booming, but when conditions start to change. And that's exactly where the story begins to turn. At first, the changes were subtle: a hiring freeze here, a department restructuring there. Nothing dramatic, no panic. But patterns began to form. Some banks started shifting key decision-making roles out of Dubai. Others reduced their exposure to certain sectors. Compliance teams grew larger, while expansion teams quietly shrank. It didn't look like retreat. It looked like caution. And caution, in finance, is often the earliest signal of something deeper. Then came the relocations, not full exits, but strategic moves. Regional headquarters shifting to Riyadh, investment desks moving closer to European hubs, back-office operations being relocated to lower-cost regions. Each move, on its own, seemed logical, even necessary. But together, they told a different story. A story of institutions slowly rebalancing their presence. Not because Dubai had failed, but because the equation that once made it irresistible was starting to change. The numbers, when you look closely, begin to reveal the scale of that shift. Over the past few years, multiple international banks have reduced their physical footprint in Dubai's financial zones. Office space, once occupied by major institutions, has either been downsized or repurposed. Employee counts in certain divisions have quietly declined. At the same time, competing financial centers in the region have seen a noticeable rise in registrations and licensing activity. Capital flows are not disappearing, but they are being redirected. And perhaps more telling is the change in deal volume originating from Dubai compared to other emerging hubs. It's not a collapse, it's a redistribution. A slow but measurable shift in where financial power is being concentrated. And when institutions that specialize in reading risk begin adjusting their positions like this, it raises an uncomfortable question. Are they reacting to current conditions or preparing for something ahead? To understand that, you have to look at how the system actually works. Banks don't operate based on headlines. They operate based on risk models, regulatory clarity, long-term incentives, and geopolitical alignment. Dubai's appeal was built on a very specific balance: low taxes, high connectivity, and relative neutrality. But as global dynamics evolve, that balance becomes harder to maintain. Regulatory pressure from international bodies has increased. Transparency requirements have tightened. At the same time, regional competition has intensified, with neighboring economies offering aggressive incentives to attract the same institutions. And then there's the structural reality. Dubai is not a domestic economy in the traditional sense. It relies heavily on external capital, external talent, and external confidence, which means banks operating here are constantly evaluating not just local conditions, but global sentiment. When that sentiment shifts, even slightly, the system responds. Quietly, gradually, but decisively. The real turning point doesn't always come with a dramatic event. Sometimes it comes when multiple small pressures begin to align. Rising operational costs, increasing regulatory complexity, shifting geopolitical alliances, changes in trade flows. None of these, on their own, are enough to trigger an exit, but together they create friction. And in finance, friction is everything. It slows decisions, it reduces margins, it introduces uncertainty. And banks, more than any other institutions, are designed to avoid uncertainty. So they adjust. They diversify their presence. They reduce concentration risk. They move pieces on the board before the game becomes unstable. What looks like a gradual shift from the outside is, internally, a series of calculated decisions, each one based on models, projections, and scenarios that rarely make it into public conversation. And by the time those decisions become visible, the direction has already been set. The human impact of this shift is often overlooked. Because there are no dramatic layoffs, no sudden closures. But for professionals working inside these institutions, the changes are real. Teams are restructured, roles are relocated, career paths that once seemed stable begin to feel uncertain. A position that was based in Dubai for years is suddenly moved to another city. Employees are given options, relocate or transition. And for many, that decision isn't simple. It affects families, long-term plans, and financial stability. The city itself begins to feel different, not in its appearance, but in its rhythm. Fewer high-level deals being initiated locally. Fewer long-term commitments, more short-term strategies. It's subtle, but it's there. And over time, those subtle changes accumulate, shaping the economic and social fabric of the place. Then there are the deeper layers that don't get immediate attention. The cost of living in Dubai has been rising steadily, affecting not just residents, but also corporate operating expenses. Housing, schooling, and lifestyle costs for expatriate employees add up quickly, making it more expensive for banks to maintain large teams. Environmental factors also play a role. The long-term sustainability of operating in a region with extreme climate conditions requires significant infrastructure and energy costs. Work culture is another factor. High turnover rates, visa dependencies, and limited long-term residency security create an environment where retaining talent becomes more challenging. And perhaps most importantly, the population structure itself, heavily reliant on expatriates, means that the local consumer and investment base is not as deeply rooted as in more established financial centers. These are not immediate deal breakers, but they are long-term considerations, and banks think in long timelines. What makes this story more significant is that it's not isolated. Similar patterns can be observed in other global cities that once positioned themselves as financial hubs. Places that grew rapidly by attracting external capital and talent, only to face challenges when global conditions shifted. The difference is in how quickly those shifts are recognized and addressed. In today's interconnected world, capital is highly mobile. It doesn't stay out of loyalty. It stays where the conditions are most favorable. And when those conditions change even slightly, it moves. That's the reality of modern finance. Dubai is not alone in facing this dynamic. But its model, heavily reliant on perception and positioning, makes it particularly sensitive to these shifts. Because when perception changes, even subtly, the impact can ripple through the entire system. And that leads to a deeper realization. This isn't just about banks moving operations. It's about what those movements represent. A recalibration of risk, a reassessment of long-term viability, a quiet acknowledgement that the environment is evolving in ways that require adaptation. Dubai is not collapsing, it is not failing, but it is being tested. The same way every financial hub is eventually tested. The question is not whether it can survive this shift, but whether it can evolve fast enough to remain relevant in a changing landscape. Because in finance, relevance is everything. And once it starts to fade, even slightly, the consequences can unfold in ways that are difficult to reverse. So, when you look at those illuminated towers again, everything may seem exactly the same. The lights are still on, the deals are still happening, the city is still moving, but beneath that surface, something is changing, quietly, strategically, almost invisibly, and the institutions that understand risk better than anyone else have already begun to act on it. The question now is not whether more will follow, but how far this shift will go before it becomes impossible to ignore. What do you think is really happening behind those glass walls? And if the smartest players are already repositioning themselves, what are they preparing for?